Watch this. No way!
That's your stomping ground, though, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah, so I'm not a Leeds lad, but I'm kind of a adopted Yorkshireman, I guess. Went to uni up here. And then when we were at university, we had like a varsity membership at Moortown. This was kind of the early 90s, I guess. 85 quid you paid to play Moortown all year.
No way.
So yeah, that was a pretty big privilege to be able to play there. And it went all through the summer. So we stayed up here working. So we were kind of surrogate members at Moortown for those 3 years, which was brilliant. And then I went away, and then I've sort of come back in early middle age when I changed career, and joined Alwoodley in 2010. It's one of these things where we don't have a waiting list; we have a waiting pool. So we constantly oversubscribed. You make your application with proposers and seconders and all the rest of it, and then you just wait for the tap on the shoulder, but not necessarily in any order. And I happened to coincide with a bit of a thrust from the club to get some younger, in inverted commas, and better, in even bigger inverted commas, players in. So I didn't wait very long. So it's been brilliant, yeah. So you
joined when you were young and great. And I must admit, in a little bit of light preparation.
When I was 35.
Well, we'll let our audience do the maths as to your age. But in a little bit of light research for this, I did obviously, we're going to do a proper introduction to you now, but this comes from your bio on the National Golf Club website. Tom is a lifetime golfer, now over 30 years playing the game. 2023, so it's recent this, marks 10 years in golf publishing, and he is still holding down a plus handicap at Alwoodley and Leeds. He's played over 600 golf courses and has been a member of at least 4, including his first love, Louth in Lincolnshire. Tom likes unbranded clothing, natural fibres and pencil bags. Seacroft in Lincolnshire is where it starts and ends. Now, look, I just saw 2 words that jumped off the page to me there, and natural fibres was where it's at. Like, I think that's to be commended. We need more people playing in natural fabrics in this game.
It's almost like I wrote that bio specifically because I was coming on a Cookie Jar podcast, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Play to your sensibilities. There's a few pieces of disclosure there because friends of mine, you know Mark Townsend, don't you? I think.
Yeah. I've been talking quite a bit to Mark actually recently because obviously part of the Moortown stuff.
I played with him yesterday. So I'd say I've been through sort of several incarnations as a golfer. I've definitely been through a kind of pseudo loudmouth sort of stage where I had some orange trousers, and I've definitely at one point or another worn a white belt. I think I kind of came to my senses maybe in my 30s. Ever since then, it's been playing colours and playing patterns. Thank you. And I have to say, I have joined the pencil bag brigade as well.
Okay, nice, wonderful. Well, look, I'm not one to. It's weird, isn't it? You touched on it there. Like, we're joking, obviously, a little bit, but there is a whole thing around the many subcultures we have within the game of golf. Obviously, National Club golfer. I want to sort of hear a little bit before we dive into the story of Alwoodley and Moortown with you, but a bit about context of your work and how that sort of overlaps a little bit. And then maybe some of those trends that you see in the game, because you've been in this industry for quite some time now, haven't you? So your background with NCG, am I right in thinking that's like sort of, I think it's like 10 years plus or so. Where did all that start for you?
Yeah, well, I think we're sort of fairly kindred spirits actually from a work point of view. So I played golf since I was 13 and 14. My parents didn't play, so I sort of fell into it on a boring caravan holiday with my mum and dad, where there was a very bad 9-holer. It's actually about half a kilometre from Woodall Spa, but it wasn't Woodall Spa in any way, shape or form. I've sort of been peering over the fence of the proper golf club ever since, basically. And I was sort of off and running, and I had a sort of classic childhood where I played all sports, but golf took over, and just spent all summer, every summer at the golf club, bunked off school. The golf club was right next door to my grammar school, so I didn't go to school very much. I played a lot more golf than I did English, I would say. And after university, I went off traveling, and then I went to London and worked in recruitment for about 12 or 13 years, ran a recruitment business. And my best friend from university, Dan Murphy, he's a kind of golf journalist, man and boy. So he's got nearly 30 years experience as a golf journalist. He's worked for NCG for the majority of that time. And he and I had talked for years about trying to do something together in golf. We had a kind of part-time university job at a golf club. And that was kind of always the plan, I guess. And I don't know if you've lived in London, but I found that every year that was passing, people I was employing were getting a year younger and I was getting a year older. It was all getting a lot like hard work.
And golf's really hard work in London as well. Like you've really got to graft to tee the ball up.
You've really got to graft to get out to a golf course. I lived in Barlow and I played at a local club called Cromhurst, which is down there like the Addington in Surrey and Croydon way. It's just a battle. Like I used to go and practice at a place called Duke's Meadow in Chiswick. Kind of like very difficult to get any sort of golf in. Anyway, so cut a long story short, the opportunity came up to buy this business, which I sold my recruitment business, and got involved here and haven't looked back since. The idea was it was going to be kind of a lifestyle thing, but it doesn't really work like that. I know it's been a lot of fun. I would say the golf industry massively delivers on a great place to work.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's been tough working in the industry and maintaining a love for the game?
Do you know what? That's a really good question. So when I started, I used to sort of laugh at people who I guess, be a bit sneery about people who I guess would now be, at the time, would be the age I am now. And you'd meet them at things like the Orlando Trade Show, and I'd have been grinding away on ranges all winter, and they'd be saying, this is my first game of golf since October kind of thing. I was like, what are they doing, these people? Like, why would you possibly work in golf and not play all the time? But that has happened to me in the last couple of winters. Kids are the big thing, isn't it? But I haven't practiced like I used to do. But in this last month or so, I've properly got the bug back. And I would say, no, I've not lost no love for it at all. Quite the opposite, actually, because it's the whole thing is the kind of depth to it, isn't it? And the more you sort of understand about things like golf club architecture, things like equipment, I think that you kind of into new levels of nuance, right? So for me anyway, and to date, in year 10 or 11 or whatever I am, I would say, no, I'm more smitten now than ever I've been.
Yeah. I think it is tricky, isn't it? I think there's lots of people out there, I think club professionals are a population that just, have got maximum proximity and ability to play the course and just almost never do. And you see that the more and more stuff you do in the golf industry, like we've observed it, I think, for us, maybe there's more of a novelty attached to it at the moment because there's recency and stuff, but like every chance, we're always desperate to get the clubs out, but you hope that will never go away.
But sometimes you just can't believe what you're doing, right? I've just been to California with work, and we played at Goat Hill, and we played at Torrey Pines, and we played a load of daft private places. And you just sort of have to pinch yourself that you're able to kind of do stuff like that and call it work. And I guess it sort of helps if you've done something else beforehand, perhaps, in that you don't necessarily take it for granted. No disrespect for my old job, but I used to spend a lot of time on head offices on trading estates in Hertfordshire, and it's not quite the same.
Apologies for the interruption, but we've partnered with our friends at Spornia UK to help you improve your game even in the cold, dark depths of winter. These guys produced the #1 golf net of 2023 as rated by MyGolfSpy and Golf Digest, giving you a chance to practice without even leaving home. But as an exclusive offer to our listeners, Spornia are offering 10% discount on any Spornia product and free swing consultation with a qualified PGA professional if you enter the code COOKIEJAR upon purchase of an SPG7 or SPG8 golf net. Also, customers who buy a net in November or December are entered into a prize draw to win a Garmin R10 launch monitor, giving you real-time information on every shot. Just head over to Spornia.uk and use the code COOKIEJAR at checkout, and without further ado, it's back over to the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're talking there about trip to California. Now, we obviously met very briefly during our spring meeting. So the premise behind this, we had a a 2-day spring meeting for anyone who's doesn't follow along on Instagram or have checked out our YouTubes. I suppose point one would be, what on earth are they doing with their time? But the second would be, we had this 2-day event at Moortown and Alwoodley. Our spring meeting last year was a massive success, and we wanted to do another. And it just felt like, as the sort of first 2 courses that Mackenzie was involved in, the proximity, the quality of both club and course, and the combination of those 2 venues was just like a winning formula. So we obviously had the first day at Moortown, which was lively. We had a brilliant acoustic set on the patio there.
Yeah, seeing that looks amazing. Unbelievable
music. It was superb. But then that was quite a late night, because Moortown's obviously got one of the great snooker rooms in golf. I think it's probably the greatest, actually. I think the raised benching around the room possibly just lifts it to a new level there. So there were some thick heads the next day at Alwoodley, and I saw you just as we got every player off the first tee. Your match had come through the 18th. You were partnered with Hannah, I think, who'd had a hole in one and was like 3 under gross or something on the back 9, which she was quick to report. And the sort of treat when everyone got off the course was that Hannah, I presume it was Hannah and it was no one else who'd got the hole in one, had bought whiskey for everyone. But I think people pushed the whiskey around. I didn't see people really feeling up to it, to be fair. But I saw you, and you were playing anyway, despite Hannah's great back 9, which I'm sure, we're glad we've shoehorned into this pod, your match went back down 19, had a quick, you were doing your playoff. I was with Jonathan, who's obviously involved in the club's heritage and course restoration work there, and saw you wearing your Go Till top. So, obviously left a bit of an impression on you there.
Yeah. I don't know if you've been, but we've all seen it on Instagram, haven't we, and read the stuff about it. It is, and I've written about it for NCG. I haven't published it yet, but it's just a kind of, I don't know, I took Hannah and Jack, who are elite AMs, pros, whatever, they're sort of down the rabbit hole of TrackMan numbers, and golf for them is a sort of, it's all precision and improvement and all the rest of it. And we've been at KBS all day inside on a TrackMan, and I was like, we need to go and play some golf. So I've gone on Golf Now, and I hadn't sort of planned to go to Goat Hill, but it sort of popped up. So we kind of went and paid a green fee. And I was like super excited, and was telling them all about it on the way there, and trying to give them the backstory and tell them about Matt Janella and tell them about John Ashworth and all the rest of it. But you could just sort of see like what they were thinking, what on earth is he on about? And it's kind of just off it's just off Highway 5, and you drive like basically vertically to get up to the clubhouse. It's called Goat Hill for a reason. It's a massive hill, and it would be much better if you were a goat rather than a human mantling about. And then it's obviously just a sort of very scruffy car park. It's got kind of surf shack style pro shop, but it was packed. There was like people whacking balls on the driving range. There's some music playing and kind of a beer fridge out the back. And you kind of, don't know, it's just pretty special place. We were knackered, right? So we like all jet lagged. We up and down the hills we played the back 9 first. And we sort of paused after 9 holes, and we're kind of looking at each other going, are we going to play the front 9? And we got a beer, and we went and played the front 9. The front 9 is the golf holes are proper. The greens were sanded, so we didn't do a whole lot of putting. There's people playing disc golf. There's people bezzing around in buggies. There's kind of all shapes and sizes of golf there. And I would say that after about 10 or 11 holes, we kind of got the idea. It was brilliant. It was kind of the first time we relaxed all trip. You kind of playing golf for golf's sake, and it was cool. And then you sort of get down the rabbit hole of reading more and more about it, and it's kind of a little window into what golf could be, right? As in, it's a community sport. The whole place has been kind of rescued by John Ashworth, has driven it, and it's been helped massively. Right, let's get this right, by favours he's been able to lean on, from Jeff Ogilvie to Gil Hans or whoever else. But the community have like massively pulled together to get the golf course back to where it is, and demonstrated to the local council that they want it. And it's brilliant. And the merch, like, let's get this straight, the merch is proper.
Yeah, it's cool. It's lifestyle stuff, isn't it? That Link Soul stuff is all very nice. It's all got that SoCal vibe. It's very cool. It's I do think, look, to answer your question, I've not been to the West Coast to play golf. But I do, you kind of get a sense for things, don't you? And you talked about nuance. there's something really nice about a club that's really comfortable in its own skin. That, and I think what you're articulating there about Goat Hill is a golf course that's very comfortable with exactly what it is, and it knows its place, and it doubles down on it, and therefore it elevates itself even further. Where the debate becomes a bit banal is where it's like, well, every golf course should be like Goat Hill. Well, no, it absolutely shouldn't be. But every golf course shouldn't be like Muirfield. But they should be really comfortable in knowing what they're doing, and they should double down on that, because I think and we're going to get into it, the nuances between Moortown and Alwoodley, just from a club culture perspective, are probably noticeable. They all have that's the great thing about this game, is that it is not uniform, that it is completely different. That feeling when you get out of a car park at a club you've never been to, it remains the best feeling in golf for me, because they're all different, and the more they double down on that, the better. So, yeah.
And I think that's kind of how we are as humans, isn't it? Right? As in, sometimes you want to put your hoodie and your shorts on and just go and play 9 holes with some music on. Other times you wouldn't mind putting a suit on and having a Carberry. Like it's not just horses for courses. It's just what different people want to do on different days of the week. There should be golf facilities for everyone, and I think that the requirement for like divergence of facility, I think, gets lost sometimes in like what is quite a polemic debate about dress codes or whatever else. So yeah.
For sure. Let's talk about Alwoodley and Moortown then. So, obviously our Course Diaries podcasts are, a little bit more immersive in the course history and stuff. You've got a great history with, in that area, Alwoodley. There's that whole stuff around Mackenzie. But, I think sometimes this, we recently did a podcast with a golf course historian, and he came up with his favourite golfing faux pas, and there's some hilarious ones in there. But he says you don't have to walk far before people sort of start putting Colt's name too close to Alwoodley. And actually, the design of that course is firmly in the hands of Alister Mackenzie as his first design. I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of the formation of the club. In a bit of prep for this, I'm sort of going through the club's history books. And just looking about how that whole thing sort of came into fruition in 1907. Obviously, Mackenzie would go on to have, the most incredible career as a golf course architect. But it obviously didn't start out with that intent. This was a founding group of members in Leeds that, found a decent plot of land, and that, the course itself sits on some superb heathland, and said, I think I've got an idea about something we could do here. And the committee sort of let him run wild, right, and sort of go and do this, and then got Colt to come and check that they weren't wasting their money in the process. I think that's my sort of limited understanding of it.
Yeah, so it's a pretty, like, when you it's funny, isn't it, when you think about sort of golden age architects, or when you think about any kind of infamous or famous professional, you sort of think that they've had a very sort of linear career, and he kind of woke up on his 16th birthday and thought, right, I'm going to go to golf course architecture college, if such a thing existed, and that's going to be my destiny. But that's not quite how life works. And I think Mackenzie's early career is like pretty checkered. He was a medical student for far, far too long. I think he was getting a stipend from his parents, and basically was able to like continue his education for perhaps longer than was required. So you kind of, I think you get, when you read about his history, you get a sense of someone who is trying to find his way in the world, and kind of perhaps didn't really have any idea what he wanted, how he wanted his life to be. And I think it definitely kind of a little bit of a contrarian, as in was not going to accept the sort of status quo, and wasn't afraid to kind of make his opinions heard. So I think he's obviously gone on to become one of the most reputable architects in the world, and been involved in huge projects. And I guess you don't get to that sort of point by just doing what everyone else has done. So I think you kind of have to have in your head, when you sort of considering Mackenzie, that he's a pretty colourful character. So he was a member at Headingley, the oldest golf club in Leeds, and he wanted to be captain at Headingley, and they didn't make him captain, and he didn't like that.
Is that right?
So I mean, a lot of this, a lot of this is obviously kind of subject to sort of myth, I guess, and legend. But I think this sort of the basic picture is that his nose was out of joint, and he said, "Okay, if you won't make me captain, then I'll just go off and build my own golf course." So this kind of like members club in Leeds where the founding members of Alwoodley met, which Mackenzie was obviously absolutely front and centre at. I think you kind of just sort of build up this picture of like quite a conspiratorial kind of environment where they were saying like, well, if we can't get our own way at the existing club or clubs, then we'll just make our own. So Alwoodley was essentially his project, like from the very beginning. He was at the formation meeting. He was made a member and he was made honorary secretary, which again, I think sort of speaks to his attitude, is that he wasn't big on democracy. He was way, way more into a kind of a self-elected group of people who would be making the decisions. And that kind of, that thread runs through all of his work with clubs. He like writes quite extensively about his frustration with committees. And
that's one thing I've circled here, because the governance stuff comes through pretty front and centre in terms of how the club's established at Alwoodley, right? It's
like a massive thing, isn't it? Like when we also from this like decision by committee, and all golf clubs have got 500, 700 different members who've all got a different opinion. And it's not necessarily constructive to making the right decision. And Mackenzie was not backwards in coming forwards at making that point. So that sort of non-elected nature of his appointment, I think is kind of like, it speaks to that sort of general disdain for democracy. And there's loads and loads of examples of his fallouts with committees. But he's kind of, Alwoodley was very, very much his project from start to finish. But that doesn't mean that his kind of relationship with the club hasn't been without its problems. It's probably worth saying at this point that like the Leeds golf or the Yorkshire golf is absolutely littered with his design. You said you don't move far in golf architecture for a Colt. You certainly don't move far for a Braid, but there's an awful lot of Mackenzie stuff in Yorkshire. So you played Moortown and Alwoodley. Have you played anywhere else up here?
Yeah, so I mean, no, in terms of around Leeds, Seaton Carew, a little bit further out, obviously, sort of there's some stuff there. Fantastic course, really noticeable qualities around the green sites, particularly, isn't there, with Mackenzie and stuff. But you start to see, I mean, Halifax remains like firmly on my bucket list. I'm really keen to see it. Crossland Heath, I think that's Mackenzie. I might be wrong. Really interested to go and see that. But there's a real glut of designs in and around that local area, because my understanding was that there was some sort of like, it wasn't quite sort of dividing the world up amongst themselves, but in the early years, there was kind of this feeling of Colt was like, look, you take the north, I'll kind of take the south. And there'd have been a bit more, around that. I know there was a whole thing around Worcester, because that was where Colt was born. And I think the Worcestershire ended up appointing Mackenzie, which was like Colt's sort of home club. And I think that would have been a bit of a sour point for Colt at the time. But yeah, I mean, in and around Leeds, because really you've got that sort of dividing point in the country. So for any Americans listening to this, you go too far west of Leeds, you then go over the sort of Peak District, don't you? And whilst there is golf to be had in and around Manchester, the land is perhaps not quite as good, but you've got some of the ancient links as well, which were already established. So Leeds was kind of lending itself to being, particularly as a busy industrial city at the time, a really good place for leisure and recreation with golf. So it kind of makes sense that Mackenzie would have had, it would have been like shooting fish in a barrel designing courses up there, I can imagine.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There's a lot of really good bits of land. And Leeds, Yorkshire, I think it's been a bit of a sleeping giant of kind of golf destinations in the UK for quite a while. Like, so England's Gulf Coast and the kind of Lancashire links is well established, Norfolk's well established, Suffolk's well established, and the kind of Atlantic links in Cornwall and Devon, and even the sort of Welsh, the Welsh trip. I don't know if you've ever done that Abu Dhabi and Harlem trip. That's my favourite golf trip. But Leeds has never really got going as kind of a tourist destination, if you like. I guess it's kind of unglamorous, right? And we try and think, when we think of golf trips, you think of kind of getting away to the seaside. But I think for you, when you've seen this, like there's brilliant nightlife in North Leeds. Headingley's an amazing student town. Leeds is a cool city. And I think that the particular pocket around Headingley Moortown is like pretty incredible. So you'd have turned right at the traffic lights in Alwoodley to get to the club. Sandmore is just the other side of there, which is another Mackenzie design. They're all within kind of half a mile of each other. So it's a proper little hot spot, and I think a kind of great 2-day kind of a 2-night, 3-day trip for people. And with your third course, you can take quite a bit of cost out of that trip. And then the wider Yorkshire Golf, like you say, like you get down to sort of Lindrick, which is sort of in Yorkshire, and Hallamshire in Sheffield. Ganton's obviously probably the most reputable one. But it's a cool place for a trip. And Mackenzie's had a sort of big hand in an awful lot of that quality. So yeah, he's left his mark on the county in no small way, I would say.
Yeah, and you know, the sequencing of the clubs I'm going to butcher, but there was obviously golf up in Leeds before Mackenzie. You know, that's, you know, the driver behind, you know, Woodley was obviously that whole business there with Headingley. How did then the sort of the next chapter unfold? You know, the course opened quite quickly. Like, you know, we're not in the days of big earth moving. We're in the days of, you know, horse and carriage and stuff like that. The course was open quite soon. You know, I think went down very well would be the high level summary in terms of the course and the, you know, what's happened there. And you know, people took to it quite quickly. But then Moortown over the road then has this, like, you know, ancient version of crowdfunding, essentially you could call it, with the 10th hole Gibraltar. How did that sort of come to be, you know, given the fact that Mackenzie had cashed his chips in and said, well, if you're not going to make me captain, I'm just going to go and found my own golf club. He goes and does that and then seems to be off within minutes after that. Yeah.
So I think that's the other thing about him. I think that what's the word? He's got itchy feet and he's always on to the next project. Like you would have read about his world tour. He's not a man that stood still. So we've got, like, the club's got this sort of pretty troubled relationship with him. So one of his legacies that sort of has stood the test of time is this business about committee decisions. So he, as we just said, like, hated committees and thought that it should be kind of an appointed a small group of appointed decision makers, basically. And that's been the case at Alwoodley up until about a decade ago, where once you're on the committee, you sat for life. Pretty amazing thing, isn't it? And that's like stuck from basically his views all that time ago.
I don't think that's daft, though. I know that, you know, we'd look at the world, you know, we're very democratic as a society, aren't we? But like what sticks in my head is, you know, when we did the film at St Andrews, you know, you look in the Spirit St Andrews and he says in there, you know, for people who don't get the old course, they haven't got the brains to understand why it's so great. And he's so dismissive and kind of, you know, projecting at people who just don't get it. Like, I've got a better golfing IQ. You don't get it. Just let me be in charge. To a degree, there's a kernel of truth in that. Like, we would all talk about golf clubs where successions of greens committees and vanity projects have butchered them, you know? And I can't look at Mackenzie and think, yeah, do you know what? Golf needs more benevolent dictators that just get it and just run with it. You know, like, democracy is great, but to a point, I'd say.
Yeah. And I think it's sort of pretty prescient, isn't it? We can all see the difficulties when you have a changing of the guard in every 5-year cycle. People have slightly different views and head off in different directions. It doesn't lead to continuity. So it's certainly a view, right? And I think he sort of begin to understand that he's kind of his own man. And that was one of the things he was particularly passionate about. And he talks a lot about kind of heated arguments he had in committee meetings that nearly came to blows. And again, like, sort of rings true with some committee meetings I've been in. And he eventually resigned as secretary of the club because he was too busy with other projects. And I wonder whether, kind of reading between the lines of some of the stuff you read about this, that actually with that kind of close relationship over the years, there's been, I think, a little bit of contempt, a little bit of like competition between the two clubs. So when he took on the Moortown project, which we can talk a little bit about in detail, that chimed in with his resignation as secretary at Alwoodley, and the kind of stuff that stated is that he was too busy. But I wonder about that.
Really?
So these days there is definitely a sort of entente cordiale between the two clubs, and we work together to get Yorkshire golf on the map. And we've tried really hard to sort of educate the clubs that if they want to attract visitors from far-flung parts of the UK or the US, then they need to be presenting themselves as one thing almost. And that's why UK, and that's why a lot of people come, is that they're two kind of GB&I top 100 clubs you can play together. But I mean, when we started trying to talk to the club about that from a marketing point of view, one particularly influential member said to me that we would work with Moortown over his dead body. And
Really?
that was kind of, and I can say this laughing now, it's no longer the case. But that was very much the way, is that the view was that we were kind of vying for top spot in Yorkshire Golf or second spot in Yorkshire Golf for Ganton fans. And we were certainly vying for local business and local reputation, and we were competing with one another. And I wonder how much that goes right back to the start of, well, Mackenzie sort of changed horses very early on, or was kind of playing for both teams very early on. And I think that is another thing that kind of stuck, is that who owns in, which is his preferred course, all the rest of it, all the stuff that goes with that. So I think that's quite a big thing.
Strange, isn't it?
He was made club captain.
It's strange though, because it's like there is like an old school sort of militaristic view of the world, I think, with golf courses. It's like, you can only gain at someone else's loss, and being lucky to get travel around with this game and seeing different places, you see the really good destinations are greater than some of their parts. You look at the Kent coast and you look at the way they collaborate, and again, it's back to that point, they totally get their place. So they individually, all of a sudden, it becomes a better experience because the whole thing's knitted together for you so easily to drop into. And seeing that stuff with like Moortown or Woodley, like, it sets up great for a 2-dayer. Like, you just couldn't, if you want a 2-day Mackenzie here, it's just like absolutely perfect. And the thought that someone would say, well, if we collaborate with them over my dead body, it's like, well, that's just lunacy,
I know, yeah. But that was a thing. So he was club captain at Alwoodley in 1914, I'm going to say, and I think he was either club captain at Moortown. He was club captain in Moortown in 1915. So he was captain at both clubs back to back. I'm not sure anyone else has ever done that in the history of either club. I've been trying to confirm that, so I could say on this podcast whether that's true or not. But I'm pretty sure that's accurate. He's the only person to be back to back captains at either club.
Incredible.
So he's kind of like, he's wedded to both, shall we say? And that again is he's wedded to a few things, I think, in his life. So yeah, like you said earlier, Alwoodley then called in Colt to basically sort of settle some design arguments, I think, which would have been quite affronting, right? You wouldn't like that if someone basically arrived to come and mark your homework, would you? But they were kindred spirits. They'd both been in the forces, and Colt stayed with Mackenzie when he came up here. So it feels like quite a strange thing, and that presumably the gentlemen of Alwoodley thought they were doing this clever thing to get Colt up to say, what do you think of Alister's work? And actually, Alister and Colt, I think, were probably in cahoots about it and had almost total agreement. Although I think that, again, this is what I think is fascinating about it. You're reading documents and you're reading texts which are kind of often written by Mackenzie, right? Or they're written by Mackenzie biographers.
Written by its victors, isn't it, at the end of the
Exactly,
day?
yeah. History's written by the victors. So I think that whatever Colt said to Mackenzie was always going to write, and he agreed with me. And that is what he says. So I think that to me is like, I think you get a lot of examples of that where the people working on projects are actually probably working a little bit closer than perhaps their paymasters presume. So I quite like the idea of them two sort of furtively looking over drawings and moving earth and making the men of Alwoodley thinking that it was their idea. I quite like that.
Yeah. It's quite clear there was a level of respect there. I think we talked about it on a previous podcast episode, and it's, I think Colt even paid off Mackenzie's debts or something when he died and stuff for his widow and stuff. Like there was a lot of deep rooted respect there. I think they were, really partners in many respects and worked collaboratively, and probably thought leaders in the game that challenged each other. You look at, evolution of Colt's work into sort of really bold, higher profile stuff from quite simple stuff at the sort of early 1900s. And it's, it's probably like that same sort of Philadelphia school of architecture in the States. These people were there to challenge each other. That was the way it was done. You'd sit down in suit and tie in the evening and go to a private club, and you'd challenge each other on wisdom and stuff. And it's quite nice to think about, that sort of stuff. Talk to me about the courses, because there's a few things where, Mackenzie courses are not short in hyperbole. This whole stuff around him working in the Boer War and visual deception and stuff, and I don't know, just how the course is set up in terms of what your take is on them. I'm not talking about the quality of it or the green speed, obviously, in terms of the characteristics. I feel like Alwoodley and Moortown are very different golf courses, to be brutally honest. I mean, how would you, as a local man who's played them a lot, how would you kind of best describe them? Somebody who's never seen either.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they are sort of totally different beasts, as it were. So if I was trying to describe Alwoodley to people, it's very similar, I think, to some of the Surrey heathlands. It's one of few sort of genuine bits of heathland in the country. So Walton Heath, Woodall Spa, I kind of guess are similar pieces of land in the sense that they're sort of big flat bits of terrain, with very, very sandy soil, and a lot of sort of finer grasses flourish at Alwoodley, particularly in the summer months. So it's proper in that sense. It's also, Alwoodley is one of these courses that's much better to know. Like, it's a pretty nuanced place. I don't think we've got many kind of what's the word, wow moments. Like, we don't have like huge elevated tees, and we don't have kind of like huge amounts of elevation change throughout the course. But the quality of it never sort of drops below a 7.5 out of 10. Like, it's really, really consistently good the whole way around. It's like super close to the centre of Leeds, but you see some of the kind of new money houses on Wigton Lane, which are kind of like proper plotbusters occasionally. But basically, you are out in the country, and that is, I think, a very privileged thing, is that we're only 4 or 5 miles from Leeds city centre, but you could literally be in the middle of nowhere. So the turf is really good. It's undoubtedly a heathland. Moortown, I think, is possibly more visually appealing on some holes. I think it's maybe got some more wow factors, certainly since some of Clyde's kind of more recent work. If you think about holes like Gibraltar and what he's done on the 5th now, like, they kind of set up into the eye. They're like pretty stunning things. Yeah. The land's more inconsistent at Moortown, I think, and you kind of when you get out into the middle of the back nine to the top, you're onto some very heathy holes, but it kind of starts off greener, and they're working really, really hard, I think, to restore the kind of the Mackenzie principles. And then Clyde's working on a 10-year project with them leading up to the anniversary of the Ryder Cup. I think sometimes in their sort of their perhaps recent history, they've got a bit confused about how to present the golf course. And if you look at some of the pictures, they've got kind of striped fairways and stuff. To me, I think with the right agronomist and the right architect working on it, it will return to being a very sort of heathy piece of land. They've taken out like loads and loads of trees. I feel like it sets up like an American inland course at Moortown, and I mean like some of the best American inland courses. It's got white bunkers. They've kind of cleared out the base of the trees. But I think I think it'll be a real climb at Moortown in the next 10 years. Yeah, I think it's got huge potential. The course has been a little bit compromised by the proximity to property, and it had to reroute a couple of holes over the years. But yeah, I would say that it'll be a noisy neighbour to Alwoodley, I would have thought, over the next decade or so. It's
a great way of summarising it. And you touched on Clyde there. I mean, funny enough, spent a bit of time with Clyde this week and chatted to him. Like, he's just one of those people that's just deeply knowledgeable and competent, just kills you with competence. He's like, sees things that you just honestly, you're just not going to see. Like, just IQ's off the scale with this stuff. And talk to him a little bit about some of the improvements. You can see them in parts, like I think noticing stuff around some of that bunker restoration work, micro bunker at the back of 18 at Moortown, micro bunker at the back of the 12th. Like, you could tell he was absolutely buzzing when he reintroduced that bunker at 12 at Alwoodley, which is, it's literally, it's probably like 3 by 4 foot or something. It's nothing. It's a tiny thing. But he found some relic sand, and it was like, that was validation for him that he'd found the exact spot where this was. And he was honestly just so chuffed when he sent me this stuff. but you can see just those little touches. But then some of the bigger stuff where he's gone full restoration mode on holes like 5. I've never had the benefit of seeing either course before they've undergone some of this restoration, but I'm getting a pretty good sense that a club like it. When we had the event, Jonathan, obviously we talked about, can't be with us because apparently he's just romping through knockouts, to use your expression. We went out and had like a course drive for must have been like an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we could have spent days together. He was talking a lot about the work of Clyde. How important do you think that whole restoration piece is? And
Christ,
and
don't
like
get me
the
started.
process, like in terms of how it feels as a member or someone who plays these places regularly to see them restored, because it is a really like difficult process to go through. It's really hard with committees to convince people of change. Like there's no getting away from that. It's not utopia, but like that whole process of restoring those courses. What's the sort of take?
How long have you got? So the Clyde introduction to Alwoodley and then in turn Moortown came from a relationship that we've got with Richard Latham at Woodall. And Dan Murphy, who's my business partner, was at Woodall Twinsky Doak when he was down there doing that restoration at the time. Clyde was one of Doak's shapers. And we took Jonathan down and he met up with Clyde that week. And he's obviously someone that just gets it. But he's also often out there doing a lot of the work himself. So I think he's kind of got a real feel for how things should fit into the land. So, all power to it. In terms of the restoration work at both clubs, like I'm in absolute awe of what Moortown are doing, as in they've obviously committed to kind of letting him get on with it. And I think that is a huge thing in that they're saying we want the course to be as close to Mackenzie's original by the time of the Ryder Cup anniversary. I can't remember the year. I'm going to say 2027. Might be wrong. Anyway, coming up. And that is a huge thing. So I think they've almost given him the keys to the city. And I think that I just wish and hope that more golf clubs would do that, because they found an expert. They found in Clyde a kind of Doak and therefore a Mackenzie acolyte. They found the right person for the job who's going to who understands what he's trying to do and what he's trying to put back. And he's an expert. In every other walk of life, we find experts to kind of help us when we need knowledge that's beyond our own. So we find an accountant or we find a doctor. And at golf clubs, we seem to have this kind of obsession with our own opinion or the opinion of the membership, and it's often not to the benefit. Moortown, I think, they have got a slightly different membership to Alwoodley. We're a much quieter place, and we kind of do things little by little. We've been through big alterations over a long period of time in terms of bunker restorations and tree removal, but we're doing that at a much slower pace. So I think that some of the stuff that he's done at Moortown, I think, is some of the best renovation work I've ever seen. So you said you didn't see it before. That fifth hole was one of the most telly holes on the course. Like you basically had to play the angle. Like
one-dimensional, knock iron down, wedge on, no option.
Yeah. Probably people who could hit sort of moon balls and carry it 300 had an option, but everybody else was the most telly hole on the course. And he's taken out an entire forest of trees basically on the left-hand side to clear it out, and taken out all of the rubbish, but it's exposed that sort of massive dike bank. And I think what it's done actually, so he's worked on the fifth, but the improvement is made to the sixth hole, which runs parallel to it, is just night and day. So the sixth and the seventh at Alwoodley, Moortown rather, were new holes that they built to replace the two that they lost for their property. And they've always been a bit incongruous with the rest of the course. They were kind of tree lined, and kind of they got a bit gloomy in the winter, and they just didn't sit really with the rest of the course. And they've taken pre-Clyde, they took some trees out and cleared out the bottoms, and that improved it. And he's just gone nuclear and taken out every single tree between the two holes. So if you looked at old pictures, like you just wouldn't believe it. Like if you can imagine going for like I can't think of a famous treeland course now.
Woburn.
Woburn. If you go to Woburn, and if you said to someone, right, we're going to take out every tree between these two par fours, they just look at like you've gone mad. Well, he's done it there, and I just think, I was there yesterday, and I was just WhatsApping basically everyone I knew from the fifth tee, going, I can't believe how good this is.
Yeah.
And I think you've now got options off that tee. I think that there's other cool stuff they could do, like there's a little stream at the back of that fifth green, and they could mow it all the way into that green. So if big hitters wanted to take the green on, they'd have to think about the ball running through the green as well. And like I say, I think it's improved the sixth immeasurably. And then, like you said, like he's done some other cool stuff, like the bunker at the back of the par three, the fourth. I think it's just like it just properly sets off that hole, as in it's a focal point. It's probably just the site of bunker. You're not often going to go in it, but it really does frame the hole beautifully. And what he's done at the third as well, I think, is just crackers that people have allowed him to do it, but it's all the better for him. So he's taken out the tee bunker on the left, and he's taken out the greenside bunker and replaced it with like a Mackenzie mound. And it's made the hole like a lot more playable. And by playable, I don't mean easy. It's given the shorter hitter somewhere to hit it on the left-hand side of the tee shot. It's literally no different for a proper golfer. And I think the second shot, you've now got a bailout, whereas before you were going into with sort of 5-iron into a green that was bunkered on both sides. So I think that is brilliant restoration to me. And you can sort of see like it's going to be a real unpeeling at Moortown as he works through the holes. At the moment, I think there are some ones that have clearly been restored and some that haven't, but it's going to be exciting to watch that happen.
Yeah,
really
Alwoodley, you look at, I want to say 14, the par three.
Yeah.
The hill. That now is visually with the benefit, and again, not having seen that before, but that's like a very, very potent, pungent golf hole now. It's a long par three with that huge bunker there on the. I get the sense that's had quite a bit. There's been, but the work is not as significant because the bones of that course have probably remained a little bit more intact. Development in the local area means the routing and the perimeters of the course haven't changed as much, whereas Moortown's had a huge amount of change throughout its existence, isn't it? So
the routing at Alwoodley is exactly the same as the original. Two green sites have moved, which are 6 and 10, I think. Oh God, I think that's right. No, sorry, 6 and 11 are the only ones that have moved. So it is like very, very close to the original routing. And even when you look at like old yardages and stuff, like the holes have not changed massively. So yeah, the work that we've done with Clyde has been sort of subtler. Some people I would say subtle, but he's done some really cool green extensions which have brought back in kind of angles. And he's done a big project on the 12th over the last winter to remove a lot of trees and opened it up and restored some bunkers. I think that what will happen is that we'll restore more width, and some of those green extensions I think need more width in order to sort of provide the angles and to use them properly. But I think it'll happen, and it'll happen in a sort of iterative process.
It's the low hanging fruit, though, isn't it? Like mowing lines and stuff as a golf course.
Yeah,
it's the low hanging fruit. Like that's within the gift of most people to just over the period of course maintenance to increase the green size, reevaluate where the mowing lines are, and yet it's the first thing people have forgotten. The greens have gotten smaller. The bunkers have become disconnected from the green complex. The fairways have got narrow, and the game's become more sort of one dimensional. And yet nobody seemed to care for decades. And then it's like you start looking at golf courses. Blackwell, our home club, gets plenty of shouts on this podcast, but. That was like I think Pont says this with every club he works with, but it's like a Rembrandt in the attic, and you've just got to peel the layers back. But it's that sort of a thing. Like you've actually just got to clear away the entropy and get the mowing lines right. And if you haven't done fat lot to it, you're kind of ripe for a good restoration.
Absolutely, like one of Mackenzie's principles is the boundary as a hazard, right? And I think that's like often the first thing to go. So obviously trees grow, rough encroaches, and you get further and further away from the edge of the property, which is often where the kind of original hole was. So I think that just restoring width and pushing the golf course back to its perimeter is like a massive thing that both clubs are trying to do. We talked a bit about the sort of, is it a Colt or is it a Mackenzie? And I think if you in the case for Woodley, I think if you kind of if you look at what we've got, like some of the stuff is very definitely Mackenzie, not Colt, if that makes sense. So we've got these like massive undulating greens, and Moortown have as well. Like I sort of forgot that I was playing yesterday and thinking, God, because there's some proper slopes on some of these holes. Like the green on Gibraltar is just absolutely bonkers, isn't it?
Crazy, isn't it?
So I think at the time, you didn't really see that anywhere other than the old course, and that was one of the things I think he's brought to both clubs. So at Alwoodley, we've got there's a huge Mackenzie step, kind of running right to left on the third green. The 10th and 11th greens are incredibly slopey back to front. There's
Three is a
massive...
great pin on that left, the par 5.
Sorry?
The 3 where you get that in that little bowl on 3 on the left of the pin there. That's such a good little pin spot there. We had that for the event, and it was so much fun. People chasing the shot in on 3 where it runs down and into the dell there.
100%. I mean, just to the point about restoring width. So I think if you look at the old drawings of Alwoodley, the 3rd and the 15th, runs parallel with it back towards the clubhouse. So that used to be a shared fairway. So there was kind of there was some oaks, and then the grass was all cut kind of in a horseshoe shape that linked the 2 fairways before the header then restarted. And there's this huge pit on the left-hand side of the 3rd, which used to be a bunker. Yeah. So I think if the fairways opened up to that left-hand side and to that back left pin, you then have a shot across like a wasteland, basically, which I think would just be absolutely amazing. And you'd be able to utilise that big swale on the left-hand side of the green much more, and possibly extend the green to the right. I think there's a ton you could do with it. So
15 is like a boundary hole, isn't it? But actually, 15 is still a seriously tight drive. Like I stood there and watched a few groups come through towards the end because we were sort of out walking, taking pictures and stuff. And I feel like the closing stretch at Alwoodley, you've got to step up and stripe it. Like 15th there's not really any miss. I mean, it's death right, and it ain't great left, But the green, when you sort of get round that corner, I'd say that's the greatest reveal at Alwoodley. Like you get round that corner and you look at it and you're like, wow, that's just like a green. Even if you knew nothing about golf and you'd never played it, you would look at that and go, that's just stunning.
Yeah. So I think like if you were a cheesy caddy, you'd stand on the 13th tee in Alwoodley and say the golf course starts here, because it probably does. Like it's normally into the prevailing wind, and there's just absolutely no let up from that tee to the end. You got kind of tough par 4, tough par 3, tough par 4, tough par 4, tough par 4, and then absolutely worldy kind of probably could be a par 5 to finish. Like it's you hang on to your hat basically from that point. But yeah, I think the 15th, if it was opened up on the left hand side, you would be very much into what Mackenzie intended, because you'd obviously have the safe option to hit it miles left, as far away from the perimeter as possible. But the angle's just getting so bad then, because you're coming into that massive false front of the 15th green. And I think, exactly as you said, I think it would be all the better for a big bailout. But it is a cool green, isn't it?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
And
I've really enjoyed kind of just kind of reliving a great few days there. But honestly, the club to have a cookie jar spring meeting there is just an absolute privilege. It really is for us. I mean, massive thank you to the membership as well at both clubs and support. And it's also brilliant to kind of get to learn a little bit more about the golf course and do this podcast as well. Well, look, Tom, thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been a pleasure chatting. And look, who knows, maybe we can get you along to an event.
Watch this